took pictures incessantly. He stored them all meticulously in the attic of his house in France, and after he died, I was sort of searching for that one thing that I wanted to have that would be my memorandum of him.
He was the king of Siam, the pharaoh of Egypt, a gunslinger in the Old West to the world. Yul Brynner was a powerhouse and exotic star with a mysterious past, a commanding presence on screen, and a celebrated photographer off-screen. His shaved head, deep voice, and piercing stare became iconic, symbols of a unique brand of masculine cool that captivated audiences for decades. He was unforgettable as Ramesses II in the Ten Commandments, Chris Adams in The Magnificent Seven, and, of course, King Mongkut in The King and I, a role he performed an incredible 4,625 times on stage. But for years, rumors swirled about a much darker, more controlling side to the Hollywood legend. Whispers from film sets told of a demanding tyrant, while stories from his inner circle hinted at a difficult and domineering patriarch. Now, his own daughter, Victoria Brynner, has confirmed what many long suspected, revealing the deeply complex and controlling father behind the captivating stare. Her accounts, combined with those of others who knew him, paint a portrait of a man far more troubled than his public persona ever let on. Today, we're separating the man from the myth to uncover the truth about the man who would be king, not just on stage, but in every part of his life. To get to the real Yul Brynner, you first have to get through the incredible myth he built around himself. He was a master storyteller who treated his own life as his greatest performance. For years, he'd tell the press these wild stories about his origins. He claimed his name was Tej Khan, born on the remote Russian island of Sakhalin to a Mongol mining engineer and a Romani mother. He spun yarns about fighting in the Spanish Civil War and living a rugged life in the Siberian wilderness. These tales created an aura of exotic danger that Hollywood ate up. He wasn't just an actor. He was an enigma. He'd often say, with a wry smile, "I'm just a nice, clean-cut Mongolian boy." It was the perfect line, simultaneously humble and self-mythologizing, but the truth was a lot less fantastical. A 1989 biography by his son, Rock Brynner, Yul, the man who would be king, started to pull these stories apart. Yul Brynner wasn't born Tej Khan on an island. He was born Yul Brynner on July 11, 1920, in a home in the mainland port city of Vladivostok, Russia. Today, a statue of the actor stands right outside his actual birthplace. A permanent correction to his fiction: his family wasn't of Mongol and Romani peasant stock. His father, Boris, was a successful mining engineer with Swiss German and Russian roots, and his mother, Maruzia, came from the Russian intelligentsia. While he did have some distant Buryat, a Mongol group, ancestry on his father's side, the dramatic story of a half-Romani, half-Mongol heritage was a massive exaggeration that his own sister strongly objected to. Still, Yul felt a deep connection to the Romani people and was even named honorary president of the International Romani Union in 1977, a title he held until his death. The real trauma of his childhood wasn't surviving Siberia, but something far more personal: abandonment. In 1923, when Yul was just a few years old, his father fell in love with an actress and walked out on the family. This haunted Yul for the rest of his life, fueling a deep bitterness that shaped the brooding, private man he would become. His son Rock later said this emotional scar was the source of his father's many complexities, and his daughter Victoria confirmed he held a lifelong resentment toward the father who left. His mother, Maruzia, took Yul and his sister Vera and fled the turmoil of the Soviet Union. They first went to Harbin, China, and then in the 1930s, moved to Paris. It was in Paris that a teenage Yul started building his own identity. He learned guitar, sang in Russian nightclubs, and even worked as a trapeze artist until a bad back injury forced him to quit. Only then did he turn to acting. In 1940, with war once again sweeping Europe, Yul and his mother moved to the United States. He studied acting with Michael Chekhov and during World War II, worked as a French-speaking radio announcer for the U.S. Office of War Information. His early years in America were a grind of small parts on Broadway and directing gigs for the new medium of television at CBS. He was a working actor, But the world hadn't yet seen the king. So how did Yul Brynner, the struggling Russian actor, become Yul Brynner, the global superstar? It all came down to one role he almost didn't take. By the early 1950s, he was making a decent career as a TV director. But his friend, actress Mary Martin, pushed him to audition for a new Rodgers and Hammerstein musical called The King and I. The part was King Mongkut of Siam. When Brynner walked into the audition, something just clicked. He had a natural authority, an exotic air that was perfect for the proud and conflicted monarch. The show opened on Broadway on March 29, 1951, and from that night on, Yul Brynner's life was never the same. And that iconic bald head? It wasn't even his idea. The show's costume designer, Irene Sharaf, insisted he shave his head to truly look the part. Brynner was hesitant but went along with it. The result was electric. The shaved head, his intense gaze, and powerful physique created an unforgettable image. It became his personal trademark, a look he kept for the rest of his life. The role of the king wasn't just a performance. It was a complete merger of man and character. As one critic wrote, Mr. Brynner is, quite simply, the king. He won a Tony Award for his initial Broadway run. He was tyrannical and tender, funny and heartbreaking, all at once. In 1956, Brynner's star went supernova. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor for the film version of The King and I. That same year, he gave two other legendary performances, as the defiant Pharaoh Ramesses II in the Ten Commandments, and as General Baunin in Anastasia. His line as Ramesses, "So let it be written, so let it be done," became one of cinema's most famous quotes. Suddenly, Yul Brynner was one of the biggest stars in the world. His public persona was now set in stone. Sophisticated, worldly, and mysterious. He was a multilingual guitarist and a gifted photographer who oozed confidence. But as his fame grew, so did the stories about his behavior. The dominance he projected on screen wasn't just an act. It was bleeding into his real life, and those around him were starting to see that the man behind the crown truly believed he was a king that commanding presence audiences loved. On set, it could curdle into straight-up tyranny. Stories emerged of a demanding, short-tempered professional who ruled his film sets with an iron fist. His agent even revealed that Brynner's contracts were incredibly meticulous, specifying every last detail. The set of the 1960 classic The Magnificent Seven became a legendary battleground of egos, mostly between Brynner and the up-and-coming Steve McQueen. Brynner's own company was producing the film, giving him immense control. He cast himself as the lead, Chris, and had final say on everyone else, including McQueen. Unhappy with his handful of lines, McQueen started scene-stealing, fiddling with his hat or jingling his shotgun shells to draw the camera's attention away from Brynner. These small acts of rebellion infuriated the star. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Brynner complained constantly to the director, John Sturges. Co-star James Coburn later said he'd never disliked an actor as much as he disliked Brynner. Describing him as arrogant and demanding, Coburn recalled Brynner storming off set in a rage over McQueen's antics, threatening to quit unless a shot was redone to focus on him. Years later, when Steve McQueen was near the end of his own life, he reportedly called Brynner to apologize and thank him. A final reconciliation after a long and bitter rivalry. Robert Fuller, who took over a similar role in the sequel, Return of the Seven was terrified of meeting Brynner after hearing the stories. Their first meeting was ice cold. When introduced, Brynner, sitting in his makeup trailer, just stared at Fuller in the mirror for a long 30 seconds. Finally, he asked, "Do you drink?" After another tense beat, he asked, "Do you play poker?" When Fuller said yes to both, Brynner's whole demeanor changed. He grabbed him, pulled him into the trailer, and they became great friends. It was classic Brynner. He tested people, and if you passed, you were in. This reputation followed him everywhere. His son Rock acknowledged his father's difficult nature, admitting he could be difficult and went a little crazy at times. The line between Yul Brynner the actor and King Mongkut the absolute monarch had all but vanished. This wasn't just on the soundstage. It was the ruling principle of his private life. Off-screen. Brynner's need for control was even more intense. He was married 4 times and had 5 children, including a son, Rock, with his first wife, Virginia Gilmore, and a daughter, Lark, with whom he had limited involvement. In 1962, his second wife, Doris Kleiner, gave birth to their daughter, Victoria. He later adopted 2 daughters, Mia and Melody, with his third wife, and was with his fourth wife, Kathy Lee, until his death. It was a complex family history kept behind a wall of privacy. Brynner once said, "People don't know my real self, and they're not about to find out." But over the years, that wall has crumbled, thanks in large part to his daughter, Victoria Brynner. Now in her 60s, Victoria has confirmed the long-held suspicions about her father's authoritarian nature. In her words, he ran the household with a highly individualized structure of control, imposing a system of discipline down to the smallest detail. This wasn't a warm, spontaneous home. It was an environment where everything was micromanaged to protect the reputation he'd spent a lifetime building. This control was absolute. Victoria described growing up in a world where her father dictated their daily routines, their education, and even their friendships. Potential friends had to be vetted in advance, and some were rejected as unsuitable for her long-term development orientation. When Victoria wanted to study liberal arts, her father intervened, steering her toward a business program because he felt art wasn't a free space without control of thought. Victoria has stated that in her entire adult life, she never once heard her father apologize or admit he was wrong. Disagreements were not tolerated. In his eyes, she said, there was only one rule: either fit into his image or be excluded from it. He also built a fortress around their past, creating what Victoria calls a no-go zone around his origins. The children were forbidden from discussing their family history. Russia, China, and France were off-limits. They couldn't even ask about their own ancestry. Old family photos were hidden away, only to be seen with his permission. This was a deliberate erasure of any story that didn't fit the Yul Brynner myth. Victoria's most poignant search for connection came after he died. She went looking for a memento and found it in the attic of his home in France. Thousands of photographs he had taken and stored away. Brynner was a genuinely talented photographer, and Victoria compiled his work into a book, Yul Brynner, A Photographic Journey. It was a way for her to finally connect with the man who had so fiercely controlled every other aspect of their lives. Through his lens, she could see the world as he saw it, the observer, not the dominator. But for the family living under his roof, that domination was the overwhelming reality. Yul Brynner smoked his first cigarette at 12 years old. For decades, a cigarette was his constant accessory, a key part of his image. In 1983, that habit caught up with him when he was diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer. True to form, he faced the diagnosis with the same iron will that had defined his life. He refused to let the illness stop him. While undergoing grueling radiation therapy, he returned to the stage for a final tour of The King and I. He gave his final performance as the King just a few months before his death, completing an incredible 4,625 performances in the role. But in his final years, something shifted. The man who had controlled his own image so meticulously decided to send one last powerful message to the world. A few months before he died, he sat for an interview on Good Morning America, knowing the footage would be used after he was gone, released by the American Cancer Society just days after he died. The commercial was stark and unforgettable. A frail Brynner looked directly into the camera. With his famous voice, now raspy with regret, he delivered his final lines. "Now that I'm gone, I tell you, don't smoke. Whatever you do, just don't smoke. If I could take back that smoking, we wouldn't be talking about any cancer. I'm convinced of that." It was a stunning moment of vulnerability from a man who'd rarely shown any. His son Rock said the act was entirely in character. "He was the emperor of the universe," Rock stated. "He controlled everything." Even in death, Yul Brynner was directing his own narrative. He died on October 10, 1985, at the age of 65. So, what are we to make of Yul Brynner? His life was a study in contrasts: the manufactured myth versus the traumatic reality, the on-screen charisma versus the off-screen tyranny, the controlling father versus the vulnerable man facing his own mortality. Victoria Brynner's confirmation of his difficult nature doesn't erase his incredible talent, but it does force us to see him in a new, more honest light. It's a powerful reminder that behind every legend, there's a human being. With all the flaws and complexities that come with it, what do you think? Does knowing about his private life change how you see his iconic roles? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe for more that reveals the truth behind the legends. Yul Brynner's legacy is immense. He was a star of unique and powerful charisma who created some of cinema's most enduring characters. His performances as the King of Siam, the Pharaoh of Egypt, and the leader of the Magnificent Seven are unforgettable. He was also, by his own design, a man of mystery. A carefully constructed persona built on a foundation of captivating stories, but thanks to the honest accounts of his children, particularly his daughter Victoria, a darker truth has been confirmed. The man behind the myth was deeply wounded by childhood abandonment, and he spent his life trying to control his world to never feel that powerless again. This need for control became tyranny on the film set and a suffocating presence at home. He was a mesmerizing yet merciless figure whose personal demons were as dramatic as any of his on-screen roles. Perhaps Yul Brynner's greatest performance wasn't as the king, but as Yul Brynner himself, a role he played with commanding authority until the very final curtain.